From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. So, okay, look, I had this crazy little thought while I was watching the mayoral debates back on Monday. Rahm Emanuel calls up his buddies over at 1871 and he says, hey, look, I haven't had a press event over there for about, 3 weeks talking about how you high-tech guys are the only creative and wonderful thing happening in Chicago and how you're the only hope for our future. So, yeah, I'd like to come over and do another one this week, but I do need one favor. And then a brand new gaming startup over there in the Merchandise Mart gets to work and builds a virtual Carol Marine. It's a kind of a flight simulator thing. You sit in a studio and video images of Carol start flinging at you from all directions. And she says things like, no, let's not do that. Let's answer my question. Where will you get the money? Do we have enough cops? Who are your investors? And the mayor, wearing his sweats and straight from the gym early on a Saturday morning, faces off with this virtual Carol for about 3 hours. Every answer is rated on the screen, hard numbers, facial expressions, humor, warmth. They're all broken down by regions and digitally evaluated, and the algorithm tracks his evasive ability. And then when he's finally let out of there, sweating and exhausted, he's ready. How will you fill in the billion-dollar hole in the pension shortfall if and when the Supreme Court says that your pension plan is unconstitutional? Most effective answer? Carol, 2 things. First, when I came into office, our children were getting a half a day of kindergarten. Second, some kids weren't getting any kindergarten at all. I fixed that. I may be abrasive, but I love the children. And he faced the real Carol Marine on Monday, and the media was ecstatic and said he won. And for all we know, the startups have already contributed $140,000 to Chicago for Emanuel, and everybody's won. It's too bad about Garcia, though. I forgot about him. He was kind of evasive and unfocused in the debate. At least that was the conventional wisdom. He's just not mayoral enough, So we'll find out today if he is mayoral enough because Miguel del Valle is back. How you doing, Miguel del Valle? Probably the person in Chicago who can best relate to Chuy Garcia right now. You were Hispanic 4 years ago when you ran.
Yes, I was.
And so I think you might have some insight to what's going on right now with Chuy Garcia. And Kai Zabar is joining us for the very first time. Really happy to have you here, executive editor of the Chicago Defender. And the Chicago Defender has editorialized in favor of Rahm Emanuel, so it'll be very interesting to hear that perspective. And Bill Ruthhart is joining us from the Chicago Tribune, reporter who's been covering Rahm Emanuel and covering the race from the beginning. Newly bearded, and it's good to see you.
It's the election beard. I'm looking forward to shaving in a few weeks, but good to be back.
Well, let's hope it doesn't go into another runoff or something. It's gonna be. All right, so we had this mayoral debate on Monday, and I think the conventional wisdom was Mayor Emanuel ran off with it, and Chuy Garcia was left behind with a kind of a rubbery, non-defensible thing about how he will maybe fix the money thing later on if we just give him a chance, right?
Well, this debate kind of reminded me of Barack Obama's first debate with Mitt Romney.
Me too.
Where Mitt Romney just left him in the dust. And then Barack came back very strong and then really did better, much better than Mitt Romney. I'm kind of counting on that this time around because I think Garcia has some great ideas. I think he's going to have to work really hard to articulate those and to get his message across. Emanuel is now an experienced debater. He came prepared, but he didn't answer a lot of questions in his debate, but it sounded good. And so hopefully Garcia will be able to pinpoint those areas and get into them in the next debate. I don't know what the format is going to be. Format is very important. But
do we know what the next one is?
It's on Fox next week, Thursday.
Yeah. A week from now.
And so hopefully it'll be a similar format that will allow a back and forth rather than just answering questions.
I obviously want to get everybody else in on this, but as long as we're just being greedy with your time right now. So I don't know if you have like a daily communication with him. But what do you say to him? What do you say about, you got to step up your game? You got to. I mean, if you were just having a private conversation with him right now, what would you tell him?
Well, I tell him to focus in on the issues and be very clear about it. For example, when the mayor says, I haven't increased property taxes, that's not true. There's been over a $300 million increase in property taxes coming from CPS and other taxing bodies. And so it's important that he get down into the specifics without boring people to death, so that he can then become a clear contrast to what Rahm Emanuel has to do. When the mayor says he's doing community policing, well, in that particular debate, I would have reminded people that last weekend, there were 5 murders in the city of Chicago. And we've had from Rahm Emanuel about 5 plans to deal with violence, and none of them has really worked. None are effective. So Chuy Garcia has to get into his plan for expanding community policing and reducing violence and doing the kind of organizing at the grassroots level in the neighborhoods that's necessary to fully engage communities in tackling violence in the communities.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I think that when you were comparing the debate on Monday to Romney and Barack, the difference is that Barack Obama at that time was the incumbent. And I think it was more of a strategy for him to sit back and listen, because he was very much and fully aware of what he had already experienced as the president. The contrast here is that Emanuel is the incumbent and Garcia is not. And so how is he going to address things specifically unless he has the plan? He's never been able to express clearly what his plans are in terms of any of the points that you've addressed, and I think that that's his weakness.
Yeah, look, I mean, Chuy Garcia's made a calculation here that he thinks he can get elected without having to be specific about exactly how he's going to pay for these elephants in the room.
He watched Rauner do it.
Bruce Rauner
And Bruce Rauner did it. Yeah, but Bruce Rauner had a heck of a lot more money than Chuy Garcia does. That strategy works when you can just flood the airwaves in the manner that Mayor Rahm Emanuel's flood the airwaves.
That's an interesting thing that I had never thought about before. You can be vague if you can afford, if you got the money to be vague. If you don't have money, you can't be vague.
Now, as a reporter, I would never support being vague. However, that clearly is a political strategy.
You can purchase vagueness.
And so, I think when you give answers in a debate that says, well, I don't know, or well, we're going to look at that, or what, you don't look like you're ready to lead. And I think that's the issue he's dealing with. And the next morning, the Emanuel campaign had already chopped up those answers and put a web video up. So I think in the second debate, we may see, from his advisors, telling Chuy, we got to give some more specifics, or at least make it sound like you have some specifics. He's been for a graduated income tax at the state level. He's talked about that in the past. I haven't heard that lately. I don't know if he's abandoned that. He has talked about some revenue sources here and there. I think maybe he's going to have to talk about that more, because Emanuel has gotten specific on a few fronts, but he's hoping Springfield's going to bail him out, and we all know that's not a sure thing right now.
But I'd like to go back to Bruce Rauner's strategy, because one of the things that Bruce Rauner did, given all the money he had to spend, the bottomless pit that he still has, he kept referring to Quinn as a failure, and then he put up his commercials about how I'm going to do this and that. I think Chuy needs to remind people, what is it that has upset Chicagoans, Chicago voters over the last 5 years? I think he needs to zero in on the fact that the red light cameras and the speed cameras have been concentrated in certain areas of the city. He needs to zero in on the fact that African Americans, for example, have lost a lot of jobs and a lot of ground in City Hall. And that the jobs that Rahm Emanuel keeps talking about with high-tech folks downtown are not going to people on the west side and the south side in the Hispanic or the black community. They're going to other folks. And so we need to remind people that the progress that has been made, that Emanuel keeps referring to in the city of Chicago, is progress that has not been felt in many neighborhoods of the city of Chicago. In addition to the fact that people who have issues like O'Hare noise are being ignored, they aren't being listened to, and other kinds of issues that are important.
Well, one of the problems I think with the more marginalized people, be it brown people or black people, is that they have a tendency to look for the Messiah, who's going to come and take this magic wand and just, make everything go away, rather than looking at themselves as a collective and how they can sit down and bargain, talk about what they want, what their needs are, what their interests are with each candidate. And what we did at the Chicago Defender as an editorial board is met with each and put those questions to them. What we really learned from that is those issues that were of major concern to the African American community were important. So let's just look at the closing of the schools. What most people were responding to was an emotional response, but the reality is that those schools should have been closed. If you had gone in, and seen the circumstances, the situations that people were working under, they were poorly, the facilities I'm saying are like eroded, leaky pipes, rats, roaches. Who wants their children to work in that? These were in socially disadvantaged communities. The parents, therefore, of that didn't have the resources or the wherewithal to complain, to the schools. So when the time came for them to be closed, the teachers didn't even say anything. Why? Because those were probably the teachers that were in trouble. They had been put, in those situations. They didn't want to speak up because they wanted their jobs. So the CTU protected their interest in that, used it as a playing card to say, oh, Emmanuel closed all the schools. The reality is that those schools deserve to be closed. What we needed to be looking at is a whole different question. Okay, let's close the school, and what next? And that didn't happen. So those are the kinds of questions I'm saying that we need to be addressing, not just looking at the choices that were made, but why the choices were made.
Well, what would have been next then after the closing?
I think that, number one, that situation was inherited. That's something that Rahm Emanuel walked into. It wasn't something, it didn't just happen yesterday or, today. So the reality is all along, you need to create, it should have been a situation where they were planning to build other schools there. Now the complaint is that the money was given to charter schools, and it's been miscommunicated that those are private schools. They're not. They're public schools as well, with a different, orientation, but it's still a public school. We just have to talk about how you're going to redirect, the educational process in those particular areas, and then where are those children going to go to school, and what kind of education are they going to receive.
And you have faith that Rahm Emanuel can lead that effort?
I think that he has more skill and ability and connections to make that happen. I think that when we talk about politics, it's about relationships, it's about experience, and it is about, money, and it's about connections to make things happen. I think that he has that. However, I think it's important that the community, the African American community, sit down with him and say, these are the things that we want to see happen. This is, Chicago, the city that works. It's always been like that. We divide the pie, you talk about what you want, what you're going to bring to the table. So, yeah.
Maybe as long as you mentioned connections, I think maybe we ought to talk a little bit. Bill, I know you didn't actually write this story. You were not on this story today. But
I contributed a little bit to it, but
I'm familiar with it. The Tribune has a rather phenomenal and lengthy story today about Magic Johnson. And I don't know, can you just give us a quick rundown on what it tells us, what we've learned?
Yeah, this story kind of had 2 points. One was to lay out these details with the relationship with the mayor and Magic Johnson and his partner Mark Walter. The other one was kind of updating a previous series that I worked on with a couple of reporters in that story, in which we looked at the contributions to Mayor Emanuel's campaign and the relationship between those contributions and decisions made at City Hall. That series found that of the $30 million the mayor had raised at that point, about half of that money came from a very small circle of donors, about 100 donors, and of those donors, 60% got something from City Hall in our analysis. This is a more recent example of that kind of a thing happening, where Magic Johnson and his partner have a press conference last month to give $10 million to the mayor's summer jobs program.
I think we remember this. It was just a few days before the election.
Right. It was right before the election.
Big deal in the black community. Here's a hero coming in to say, I love Rahm Emanuel and I like him so much I'm giving $10 million to the children.
to the summer jobs program, right? Which addresses a couple of issues the mayor's had in office. One is violence, and he's repeatedly said these jobs keep kids off the street and give them a paycheck. Two is economic development in the neighborhoods, and so it kind of hit two areas that he wanted to hit. It was a benefit to him. The company that was set up to make that $10 million contribution a week later gives Mayor Emanuel's campaign a $100,000 contribution. Now that number's up to $250,000. What the story also lays out is that this came after Magic Johnson, one of his companies, got an $80 million contract with CPS to oversee some facilities for the school district. So those are kind of the basic facts laid out in the story.
Yeah, and I think that we can't just gloss over that. It's $80 million, that contract. And I think that his company and Aramark are now the private contractors who are running the schools.
Mm-hmm.
Is that not correct? They're handling all the cleaning,
I think so.
maintenance,
That's right.
all that
and,
stuff.
And you know that there's a lot of dissatisfaction.
All the
with those
janitors were fired,
services.
the engineers mostly.
The Chicago Principals Association has reported that the vast majority of their principals are totally dissatisfied with the cleaning services that they're receiving from Aramark and other services. And so it's a big issue, and I think you're going to be hearing more about that issue before April 7th.
So I just can't quite figure out if this is, I mean, we're seeing this as being part of a bigger issue, aren't we, of this kind of influence? I mean, I don't know, Caillou, does it bother you that there's this level of influence at City Hall? I mean, we've always seen it, but it just seems like the numbers are just stunning now.
I think, yeah, and it's reflective of what's happened in America. I mean, this goes on, everywhere. I mean, it's very frightening being a person who is, from the journalistic world to know that the same thing happens in our world. Some big conglomerate comes in, buys the communication agency. I mean, really, and
Bill,
and we all know this.
Right. Everybody who works in communications.
I think the best thing that we can do, and the most powerful thing we can do, is to study, research, and have the facts and be knowledgeable. Knowledge is power, contrary to popular belief. They tell us that it's, money comes in, but it's really the knowledge. And so one of the problems that I think that we face is not having an informed, and educated or knowledgeable voting, population. People are responding to things emotionally. They're responding to things based on, one little box. And we've got to look at how the dots connect. So what you're talking about is connecting the dots here.
Yeah.
People have to understand that. And we're not an educated voting group anymore.
And that's why the 30-second ads, the 20-second ads have an effect. Negative campaigning, negative ads have an effect.
Yeah.
But who can afford to pay for all those ads? The candidates with multi-million-dollar campaign funds. And where do those millions of dollars come from? They come from people who want to buy influence and who want contracts, for the most part.
And now
That's the way it is.
It just seems blatant now. I mean, it's like, I got to tell you, I read that story this morning about $250,000 coming back from Magic Johnson, and I thought, that's about average. But I mean, it's like, what's wrong with me? Why am I not offended by this?
Well, there's certainly a pattern here with the mayor where many of these top donors have something at stake. We've written numerous stories about developers who have approvals pending before City Hall for massive skyscrapers. And the mayor's calendar shows him going to the Lakeshore Drive condos of these folks, meeting with them, having campaign money come in, and then the next week doing a ribbon cutting or some event for the building,
Or a
which
building permit.
which still has to go through the approval process. These are a pattern that's out there. We've reported on it extensively. We've repeatedly asked the mayor for the better part of 2 years to discuss his fundraising. He's refused to at every turn. The story today has a very brief exchange in which I caught up with him at a diner in Bronzeville and asked him about why it was okay for him to take money from developers and people that have business pending before City Hall. His only brief answer was that he follows the law, and he walked away.
Yeah.
So that's
He does follow the law.
That's the situation.
Okay, so let's turn our attention to something else. this was going on actually while we were recording our show last week, so we didn't get a chance to talk about it. But this weird thing with Carrie Austin, just spontaneously, a group of 10 or so aldermen who really think it's important for us to know that the mayor must be reelected and that Chuy Garcia is a danger to our society, just spontaneously held a little press event to let us all know how much they really think Chuy Garcia must not be elected. Of course, the mayor's campaign manager was standing there with them in City Hall. And then Carrie Austin either went off script, she's the budget director, she either went off script or was directed to do so that it would deflect some attention from the mayor, and just says, well, yeah, there's going to be a huge property tax increase as soon as the election is over. So that kind of got that on the table. I mean, how did you read that?
That was a rare moment of candor on the part of an alderman.
Was it candor, or was it?
It really was. I think she heads the budget committee. She knows the numbers, and she understands that property taxes are going to have to be on the table as part of the discussion about where we're going to get that revenue. You know, the mayor has, in response to the question about how are you going to make that $500 million payment on pensions, has talked about going to the legislature. What he's saying basically is that we're going to get legislation passed that will allow us to reduce that amount and then ramp up over a period of years. That's been done before in the state of Illinois, but that means that the reliance on property taxes as a possible source of that payment will be lessened if the mayor is able to get legislation passed in Springfield.
And get the Supreme Court to go along with it.
And get the Supreme Court, that's another piece of the puzzle that has to fall into place.
Yeah.
So she knows those numbers, she understands, and I think that every now and then, you know, you get an alderman that's frank, and then maybe later on she regretted saying that. But she spoke the truth, I think.
Yeah, anybody who knows Alderman Austin knows she doesn't pull punches very often. I do think that was a moment of candor, as you said. What's interesting is that opened up this whole property tax discussion. The mayor comes out with a white paper that warns that property taxes could explode if the legislature doesn't do something. And then days later, he's at the debate saying property taxes are off the table.
Off the table,
which his campaign then later walked back afterward and said, well, it's not off the table, it's a last resort.
It's just on a side table over there.
What he's really asking for Springfield are three things. He's asking for a broadening of the state sales tax to get more revenue for Chicago. He's asking for those pension payments to be pushed off, or this not be so steep immediately. And he's asking for a Chicago casino, which now this is his third iteration of Chicago casino. The first time he wanted it for road projects, the second time he wanted it for schools, and now he wants it for pensions. But that's not money that would be down the road immediately.
I proposed that in the last mayoral campaign.
So, I mean, the thing that kind of annoyed me about the debate was that Chuy Garcia was, I would say, rightfully pilloried afterward for having no plan, for saying, I'm going to create a commission to look at it. But the thing was that then everybody said, well, but the mayor, on the other hand, now there's a guy with a plan. But his plan appears to be, I'm just going to kick it to the legislature and the Supreme Court and hope that they will do something for me.
That's right.
But neither of them were willing to say, this is a really big deal here. We got a really big problem here. And, I'm sorry to tell you this, guys, but you are going to feel some real pain before this thing is over. Neither of them would say that.
Look, in politics, you can't say that.
So neither of them can say
If you say that, if you speak the truth, the voters will turn on you.
That's true.
It's as simple as that.
Especially if you're Chuy Garcia and you have $2 million to the mayor's 20, and the moment you say anything about a specific tax increase, the attack ad goes up, right? I'm sure that's what he's saying.
They already had it cut in the editing room. All they had to do was just drop the video in, and bam, it's gone. It's on TV, right?
Well, I'm just smiling because the Obama way was to say we're going to go through a lot, and we're going to go through it together, and you didn't get any of that. But I do think that the reason why the voters tend to, at this time, lean towards Emanuel is because they know that he's done it. Whatever it is, it's like, this, it's the old friend who their bad habits, and it's like it might not get better, but we know this. And so when we look at Garcia, we want to hear some specifics, that's a weakness.
But
there.
not only that, Ken, I've been around a while, and I remember the Harold Washington race when he was up against Epton after having won the primary. And Epton's message was, elect me before it's too late. When Kirk made the statement about Chicago will become Detroit, it reminded me of that. That's the message that's being conveyed by the business sector and a lot of folks around Rahm to scare people into thinking that only Rahm can do this. He's the only one with the expertise to do this.
That's really the essence of my question. Is it fair for us to have this double standard of allowing Rahm Emanuel to be vague about how he's going to do this, and then and then attacking Chuy Garcia for being vague? I mean, is it just that situation that the challenger has to be less vague than the incumbent?
Well, I don't think that you have to be less vague as an incumbent. I think that as an incumbent, you have a track record. That's the difference, that you have managed and have handled the business. It may not be necessarily to our liking, but we know that you can do it. So when you have the your opposer basically not saying anything, it's like, well, we know what we have here. We don't know what we're going to get over there. That's
you're probably right about that, because I forgot which poll I just read this morning, but 57 to 23% of Chicagoans polled just in the last couple of days expressed confidence in Rahm Emanuel's fiscal ability. So, I mean, it's overwhelming.
And I think the other side of that is, one of you said that earlier, you have to appear mayoral. You have to appear that you can handle it, you can manage it, and it's just all, I think, a matter of how you answer and respond to things that are being thrown at you.
And by the way, I did want to wish all of you a Happy New Year, because it's March and the year has begun at Chicago Public Schools, which has a 10-month fiscal year. So they borrowed January and February to pay last year's bills, so the year is starting now in March, which means that things are going to get even tougher as time goes by. So we're just about out of time, and I thought I would circle it back around and ask you, Miguel del Valle, tell me in a sentence or two, what can you say to Chuy Garcia to get him back in the game here? What's he got to do?
Well, I don't think he's out of the game.
Okay.
I think he's still in the game. I just think he needs to tighten things up a bit. He certainly needs to do better in the next two debates. I think there are two left. And he needs to get back to reminding people of why they have been concerned about Emanuel. Why did they vote for someone else in the last election? Or why didn't they vote at all? And what is it that Emanuel has failed to do in order to address the deep concerns that exist in neighborhoods throughout the city of Chicago? The folks downtown are happy, but everyone else is unhappy. He needs to remind people why everyone else is unhappy.
Okay, that's it. All right, Miguel del Valle, thank you very much for being with us today. It's really interesting to have you on the show. And Kael Zabar, first time we've met, thank you for being here, and I hope you'll be back many more times again. Bill Ruthhart, of course, from the Chicago Tribune, one of the busiest guys in Chicago, writing about all this, and I'm glad you were here too. It's all about you. You've been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can watch us anytime by going to this address. But also, you can see our second edition. We're doing 2 shows a week now, and our second edition will be on the wards. We got 4 more wards to talk about, the ward races coming up. So thank you very much, and we will see you back here again next week on CAN TV. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks. Bye.